Hi, friends. In this episode, you will hear the sweet little needy sounds of our guest's cream long haired dachshund, Belle. So have no fear, the dog is safe. She's just very needy and very sweet.
Welcome to Short Skirts and a Long Scripture,
where we discuss and create a space to heal from religious trauma. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Cass.
And with us today is our guest.
Hi, I'm Carrie.
Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks.
We're here to talk with Carrie about her experience in the Christian community that we were a part of, and to talk about mental health and spiritual health and relationship health and what that looked like while we were in it and when we got out. Let's get started.
So we'll start with the first question that we usually ask our guests, Carrie, and that is just to get to know you. What is your background with Christianity and the church?
Yeah, so I was raised in a Christian home. I was actually a pastor's kid, and there are even pictures of me as in practically an infant sitting up with my back propped up against the stage while people were practicing worship for church and stuff. So I was like raised in the church, which honestly I think was beautiful, and I loved it. And back then it was really simple. I think also just like my initial understanding of like Christianity and the church, and then how I came to faith, like my salvation story is quite basic. It was very fundamental. It was very much just like, I know that there is hell and I don't want to go there, and Jesus is the way. And I think in my naive young self, there's a beauty to that, just the childlike faith. And then I kind of feel like I coasted for a while, and I just memorized scripture from a week to week basis and went to church and blah, blah, blah. And then when I was about 12 was when I first got introduced to the community group. And that was definitely a shifting point in my relationship with the church and Christianity.
Yeah, so do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you feel comfortable sharing about your experience?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how do you get involved?
I do remember So I was I think I was about 12, and I was honestly super excited. I remember specifically just little blurps, but like I remember going out to our gigantic barn with my dad, and again, being a pastor's kid, we had like 50 of those really basic black hardcover Bibles out in the barn. And he grabbed one down
I
for
had a
me.
little one.
Yep. And there's a sweetness to that, just being, it was my first kind of Bible of mine. And I remember taking it to the youth group and participating, and I remember loving it, and it was fantastic. And I think it was really neat because it was my first experience being with a bunch of people my age, I think, and being able to experience that together.
Yeah. You were such a people person too. I mean, still are. That was probably just like a highlight for you. Like there's all these people.
The socializing
I love it here.
I mean, I'm a hairstylist now, and so I kind of talk with people like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was really good. And one of the things as I look back on my time with this youth group too is, while like I know we're going to kind of recap, but in some ways just jumping in, while there were a lot of challenging things and a lot of unhealthy patterns and mindsets that I came out of it, it was phenomenal that it gave me a space to be with people my own age, because I think without it, I would not have had that in my teenage years. And so that was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Cassie and I have talked about this before. One of the good things that came out of it was the space to interact with people. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a lot of weird teachings that we remember and toxic thoughts and patterns that we came out with for sure.
For sure.
So, can we talk a little bit about some of those things that we learned? One of the things we remember, a previous episode we've talked about, is our mental health before, during, after being in this Christian cult. Um, do you have any thoughts or any memories of what your mental health looked like in? Like if it was good, if you were always like really excited, yay, I'm going to youth group, whatever. Um, and then coming afterwards, any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so I would say like it was right around that age that I started struggling with some depression and just general feelings of failure. And I think at first it started fairly minor, but eventually it really did develop to clinical level of depression. And that's not to minimize when people have a quote depressing day or a sad day. That's totally valid.
Yeah.
And mine was full blown clinical level depression that was
Yeah.
day in and day out, and it was getting darker and darker. I had
Mm.
feelings of failure, and um, I was trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, what I could do to make it better. And I think one of the things that, this kind of ties mental health with spiritual health, but we're kind of talking
Mm-hmm.
about the holistic health anyways, is that in my young faith and in my just 13-year-old brain, right? My brain wasn't fully developed. I would think like maybe I'm not reading the Bible enough. Maybe I'm not praying enough. What am I
Yeah.
doing wrong? Maybe what could it be? And then when I would try to ask my small group leaders and people who I trusted, I think not always, but often it would come back with the encouragement to be like, yeah, you should read your Bible. You should pray more, which I think their thought was, I believe that they had good intent, but it really did reinforce the belief that I was failing at being quote unquote a good Christian.
Right, because these are good things to do if you're a Christian person. You should definitely be
Right.
praying to have a relationship with God. You should definitely be
Mm-hmm.
reading your Bible.
Yeah.
Definitely be seeking counsel from other Christian people. But it like left out the actual person, and it was kind of just like these are the spiritual things that you do, and we're kind of like not connecting the person with what's going on with them. We're just trying to get rid of it,
Yeah.
and this is
Well,
our solution.
and I think like even how you just jumped, I really love how you phrased that because I feel like it expresses that, yeah, these are the spiritual solutions to these
Mm-hmm.
problems. But the problem was not to completely separate them, but these were also mental
Yeah.
health challenges.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
not that again that those are bad habits, those are fantastic habits to have to
Yeah.
create healthy thought patterns and stuff, whether it's around whatever spiritual belief you believe or mental health.
Mm-hmm.
It left out the mental health side. And so I
Yeah.
think we needed to be able to
Mm-hmm.
bring these together and fully acknowledge that we're physical, mental, spiritual human beings. And it
Mm-hmm.
left out a piece. And I think that often it was because of just lack of knowledge on the other
Mm-hmm.
person's part. So it's not to bash them, but just like, hey, let's get more educated in the full realm. And sometimes maybe it was intentional, but I'm going to attempt to
Right.
choose to
Yeah.
believe, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Felt on my end when I was dealing with that kind of stuff in the group, it felt very dismissive of your feelings, like they were only
Yeah.
trying to focus on your spiritual well-being without taking care of kind of like your physical and mental well-being. Like they were very much separated. They were not intertwined at all. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of a hard one to deal with.
Yeah, you're so right. It was so just invalidating. And it also felt a little bit of like, well, almost like we don't know what to do with that. So we'll go back to what we know, which,
Yeah.
Right.
coming back to
Yes.
fundamentals again isn't a bad thing. But like, hey, can we get a fundamentals in all these realms of being a holistically healthy human being?
Mm-hmm.
So speaking about the spiritual health of the person, what do you remember being taught about spiritual health? Like what was the focus? What do you remember?
I feel like some of the things that particularly stand out in my brain that kind of pop and that I remember is it was fairly black and white at the time. And I think some of that could have been how it was presented. I think some of it was my predisposition for how I heard things. And some of it was just my maturity level that maybe this was really a talk for an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old and not a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
I remember hearing things like, well, you'll see the fruit of your actions. I remember
Mm-hmm.
hearing things like, do these things and you'll have quote unquote an abundant life. Well, I didn't understand what an abundant life looked like. I didn't understand, I don't think I understood the nuance too, that things aren't as black and white as things were made out to be. I do think that we can have a full life, but it may not be what it was presented as.
Carrie just expressed, let's
rehash that.
She was like, you were saying that it felt very black and white. They were using a lot of spiritual catchphrases, I'm gonna say, to explain things to us or dismiss things from us. And it just reiterated.
Yeah, when the people in charge are using those kind of phrases that are intentionally, they're doing it to go over your head so they can feel like they're more superior than you so that you're going to listen. 100% hardcore fundamentalism right there. Not a fan of that. The Christianese, the use of it, no thank you.
And this whole idea that everything is black and white, it's definitely see our episode on Christian fundamentalism, this idea that we're right and everyone else is other. Everyone else is outside and everyone else is wrong and we should be afraid of them. We are the only ones that have the right answers, but not in a way like finding truth, in a way that's like we use our truth as like our power and our control over everyone in our community.
Yeah.
It's so divisive, and I don't think they probably intended it for it to be that way, but that's exactly what it turned out being, is very very divisive. And you had this weird divide of people and groups and the way they were thinking and the specific things that they believed, even though we were all, you know, Christians, children of God kind of thing. And I remember there being arguments about dumb shit like that where people would, I don't believe in that. Why do you believe in that? And they couldn't have a conversation about it. So,
well, and then like the other thing I remember with it being fairly black and white, and again, this is my perspective. Everyone can have a different perspective. Like two people can go through the exact same experience at the same time, like two siblings, and they can come out with different perspectives on this. So I'll just throw that out there. But like my perspective was the way things were phrased, and again, part of it probably being the way I was predisposed to hear things, but also the way things were phrased is either you were like a submissive, really good Christian, you fell in line, you did the things, you did X, Y, Z, or you were kind of looked down on as someone that I wouldn't say, like, I think we tried to quote unquote avoid like being like, oh, they're a project person, quote unquote. Yeah. But it was definitely like, that person's further from Jesus and needs to be pointed a little bit more in the right direction. Needs a little bit more like, you know, bumper rails on the bowling alley type of thing. And that, I mean, that just, I think, again, with my predisposition and the way things were phrased, it just encouraged a very black and white, very judgmental outlook on people and on things. So
coming from a former project, that whole black and white outlook on life is a very dangerous place to be, and it's very harmful for people who view themselves as, I'm going to be the helper and I'm going to fix these people.
Oh dear.
It's
I will
a very
try to
dangerous space.
For sure. I'll give credit that, like, I know you guys have referred to this group as a cult. And if I'm honest, like the time that I was there, which I think we overlapped some, but I think I was there a little later.
Yeah.
I don't know if I personally feel like it was a full blown cult, which isn't again, not to invalidate how you guys feel. I think it really had some cultish tendencies. What I've also heard from individuals who have been part of the group even past when I was, I've heard it's supposedly gotten better. And so I'll give credit to those who have taken the opportunity to try to grow, because the reality is I know I've said stupid things 10 years ago that I'm like, wow, I am so sorry for anybody who heard that. That was awful. And so we make mistakes, and I love it to see that people are actually growing. So, you know, there's that, but that's, again, it's like how do I fully acknowledge the people who have grown and are growing, and fully acknowledge that there were some really hurtful things done and said at that time? Both are very valid and true.
Absolutely. Okay, so with that thought, then how have your thoughts towards the spiritual health, mental health changed since you haven't been part of this community for a while?
I would say overall that it's just become more nuanced. I know some of it's me growing and my development growing. I think it's also having the opportunity to step away from a circle of friends and having to grow and stretch into a new circle, and seeing that not all circles work the same way and not all people are the same. And so after leaving, I realized that things aren't as black and white. You get the experience of meeting other people, other circles, kind of stepping out of the forest, stepping out of looking at the tree right in front of you, so you get a bigger perspective, or just another perspective. Again, different perspectives can totally change your view on things. I think I would say that after leaving, one of the big things I was able to step back and see is that while there was a lot of good intent, now don't get me wrong, there was a small phase that I was just mad and I was angry. And I think it's okay to move through and move through and acknowledge and stuff. And now I've come to a point where I can say there was some really, really crummy stuff that I heard and learned from there. And I think while there was good intent, it did skew my thought patterns around spiritual and mental health. And particularly I'd say around like those clinical levels of mental health disorders. And of course, at the time, we didn't have any of that terminology. Not only did we were young and we didn't know it, but even the people around us didn't seem to know it or acknowledge it. A lot of them. So,
like we've said before, some of the things that we would consider were traumatic for us, some of the trauma that we carried from leaving this group, we know, well, at least I think the leadership's intent was definitely not to traumatize a bunch of children, but the way that they controlled the people in it with fear, and always like you said earlier, we felt like we were the absolute best and we were just arrogant as all get out.
We were straight up told we were the elite.
Yeah, literally.
I remember specifically being told that. And again, I think it was with beautiful, good intent. And oh my gosh, I have very different opinions now. So not to interject, but
no, that's great. Please.
The elite.
Yeah.
So we either thought we were the shit or we were shit. There was no in between.
Like, if you didn't match this expectation that they had for us, this unrealistic for guys and girls. Obviously, we're talking about from the girls' perspective, but guys
for
and
children.
Girls, for children,
you can't do
minors.
This to
Can we
children.
Talk about it as minors? Oh
I feel like they were giving us like almost like adult level expectations for spirituality and probably purity and every other shit that they taught us that was not, it was gauged towards adults and their expectations and not for minors who were still learning
challenge.
Everything.
Yeah, I wonder if that was part of the challenge, both for our end and to give a little compassion to them. Like, it would be really hard to speak to 13-year-olds to 20-year-olds. And maybe that's an unrealistic goal. I'm not saying it is. I don't know. It's maybe just something to consider, that maybe it should have been split at like 12 to 15 and 16 plus.
Yes. I'm not saying that scaffold learning couldn't have happened. I'm just saying that there's things that probably were said to the older group that the younger group maybe didn't need to be there for, or they needed a very different version of it. They can, probably handle a lot of the things that were said. They just needed a different version of it for their developmental appropriateness at that time.
Yeah.
Coming from the teacher end, yes.
Well, really, let's talk about, too, just the fact that a 12-year-old processes things outrageously different than a 20-year-old. And even then, a 20-year-old processes things very different from a late 20-year-old.
Yes. Yeah. The brain develops so much and so different within those, different age gaps and stuff. So for sure.
And as I've mentioned in a couple episodes before, this idea of these hard topics being taught to kids. First of all, I have the problem with, like Cass was saying, some of these things probably shouldn't have been shared with all the age groups. But I also think, like, is it important to, like, treat kids like children? Yes. We weren't really taught like children. We were taught, like, you guys are already at the mature enough level for everything possible that we can teach you about God.
You're
Which
a
I
mini
feel like,
adult.
yeah, exactly. So, well, I kind of agree that yes, you shouldn't treat children like they're dumb and they can't learn. I also feel like you definitely have to be aware of what is appropriate at what developmental stage, like Carrie's saying,
Yeah.
to introduce to a kid. Because you can tell from our conversations we've had before, maybe even from this one, it messed us up to have all that knowledge at such a young age and either being told you are the elite or you are basically nothing and you're failing and giving you depression. Like,
Or
there's
some
got to
of
be a
these
better way to do that.
expectations that were given to us. You know, if you were 13 or 12 going into this group, listening to these really kind of more mature adult conversations that they were having with the 18-year-olds and going, this is what I have to be in order to, you know, be accepted, be a good Christian, you know, grow up for people to like me in this group if I want to have a future here kind of thing even. I remember thinking those things sitting there when I was 13, 14, 15, and they just got worse as you got older.
Let's talk about some of the things that we've learned that are healthy coping mechanisms or healthy ways to change how we think or process or view the world.
Disassociation is a fantastic way. No, I'm kidding.
I 100% agree with that. Yes.
We're all just like, yeah.
Absolutely. No. Okay, that's bad. That is not a healthy way to pursue it. Just in case we were checking. Just in case.
We're not clinical psychologists, but
no.
Yeah.
No. Not at all.
No, go ahead. You want to start with talking about healthy ways that you process mental health problems?
I'd say the biggest thing that's influenced healthy relationships, healthy mental health problems is the fact that I have a phenomenal psychologist, therapist that I've been able to go to for a number of years, which I think could be looked down upon. I also think that if you struggle with a lot of mental health challenges, or just not even a lot, but if you just struggle mentally, to be able to have that level of assistance to help you be able to reshape patterns. And what I've found numerous times is that, you know, for if you are a Christian and you maybe have heard things like, oh, well, you don't want to do those things, those are sciencey, they aren't biblically based. One of the things I think I've found, the more I've grown, the more I've experienced, the more I've read, is that true science, and like the true science behind psychology, if you can strip it down and find the truth in it, it's going to align with God's truth. That's what I believe, at least. And you know, we read in the scriptures about how to renew your mind, and I think there's ways to say that, quote unquote, in a more spiritual way and in quote unquote in a less spiritual way. But it is true, like, you know, if you're trying to get something out, to fill it with something good is generally better. I mean, it also seems really basic, even just in the form of habits and stuff.
Hannah, did you have any ways that you coped with mental health when you were out and going through all of the feelings and thoughts and everything?
Okay, I like what you said, Carrie, about the true science aligning with God's truth, because I remember being taught in this group, we've talked about it before, see previous episodes, this idea that either you believe in the Bible as truth or you believe in science as truth. And we were kind of led to believe that those were opposing things. So people that were like, yeah, we believe in modern medicine and science works and science exists and it's a thing. We were led to believe that those people, oh, they're probably not reading their Bible correctly, because if they were, they would know that only the Bible is the truth. And all of the science things, this is like, if we're talking about anything from creation to medical doctors. Like, this is one of the weird things that we got out of this, of why we might consider it to be a Christian fundamentalist cult of some kind, is because this weird idea that somehow science was not created by God.
Again, black and
Which-
white.
What?
Yeah, very.
Is it possible for God to use something that he gifted man with?
Yes.
What a phenomenal idea.
Like, as a Christian person now, I believe that science is a real thing. Shocking, I know.
Yeah.
But also, like, I believe that God gives people new ideas and gives people the ability to do things. We have evidence of this in the Old Testament, when new types of professions and labor started happening and coming to be in the world. And it will tell us, like, so-and-so, the father of music, so-and-so, the father of blacksmithing. Like, God gifts people with the ability to do things in the modern world, and they're not separated. So
Yeah.
this is one of those things that I remember being taught and having to unlearn and then relearn to trust that maybe actually God is working somewhere in the modern science world.
Yeah.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I think that there are even times that some people may say, oh yeah, this is science. Well, I do say be mature enough to check it, check the facts, check the sources.
Yes.
And if you're a believer, do check it against God's truth. And if it's like, well, then the solution is to kill this person. Okay, well then let's talk about that one. Let's double check that one. But I do think, like really, really big one. We were not encouraged to do self-care in general.
Oh yeah, no.
Very big
There
blanket
was no
statement.
talk
I know,
of it.
big blanket statement. I'm sure there's nuances and little things, but I don't feel like I was encouraged to do self-care in any way, shape, or form. And even to this day, the number of believers who say like, oh, that book is just too self-helpy. And again, I think they have good intent, and yeah, we have to check everything and make sure it's sound and it's science backed, Bible backed, whatever you want to do. Make sure it's true science, right? But I think that ties into the spiritual health, that ties into the mental health, to be able to actually care for yourself so you can care for others. And if you're a believer, yes, God will care for you, and He has designed it that if we follow His path, that there's also space for us to care for ourselves, because He gave our bodies to us, and that includes our bodies and our mental health, and He wants us to care for it. So, okay, end of rant.
Good rant.
Actually, I was going to ask if you could dig in a little bit deeper to what you mean by self-care and why Christians might think you're not supposed to.
Okay, continuing rant.
Yes,
please do.
I think it's one of those things that, I think a lot of people nowadays will refer to things like a me day, quote unquote. But I think biblically, if we look at the scriptures, God sets aside a Sabbath. Now, you then have to go into this whole nother tangent of what Sabbath is and what it contains. But in a nutshell, an intentional day to rest and to worship and to reflect. And I think God created space in our schedules to have rest and to recharge. But most of us don't really fully acknowledge that or take advantage of the gift that He gives us in that. And I'll even say for myself, when my husband and I first started trying to Sabbath more regularly, more intentionally, I hated it. I did not like it. And then I was grumpy about it. I was so not happy about it. And then we had to adjust, and then I came to really, truly love it. And now we're out of routine and haven't been doing it very well lately. So we need to get back to that. But self-help, finding time to sincerely rest, finding time to pursue health in holistic ways, meaning physical health, finding time to exercise. And what I've really pursued, even just this past year, is what I've called just intentional body movement. So not even like you have to work out, but like I've been trying to, even if it's a stretch day, or if it's a little bit of a slight jog, or if it's even just a walk one day, intentional body movement. In regards to mental health, I would say figure out what you need, pursuing knowledge of what mental health looks like, good mental health, what boundaries look like in a healthy setting. I mean, in tying that back to scripture, we look at Jesus and how he even pursued mental health. He took times where he was like, guys, I'm taking a nap. Don't mind the storm. I'm sleeping through it. Leave me alone. Or, and he exemplifies, from my perspective, he exemplifies times that he set boundaries and said, no, I'm going to go away. And there were times he said, I was going to do this, but I felt prompted to have compassion on these people and not be legalistic about my me time or Sabbath or whatever you want to call it. And be able to, exemplify mental health for himself and caring well for those around him as well.
This is so important for us to think about, because I've heard multiple times from people that I would consider my elders in the Christian communities say things like belittling this idea of self-care or taking a me day, and they will always say, that's so selfish. Why would you only think about yourself?
Oh, and did you guys ever, I don't know if you guys ever heard this. I don't know if I ever heard it directly to me, but the whole what, you don't want to take a day of rest? Well, the devil doesn't take a day of rest. And I'm like,
oh yeah,
okay, maybe we shouldn't follow the devil's example. How about that? Can we consider that one? And I'm not saying everyone said that, but I'm just like, oh yeah, let's definitely follow his example, because clearly it's working well.
Yeah, literally. So this whole idea that self-care is this selfish thing that only, I've heard it's making fun of generational groups. Like, I've heard people say, oh, these millennials always taking their self-care days. And my response is now, have you read the Bible? Do you know what self-care looks like? It's not about me. It's only about me to the extent where I need to be able to help and fill and do things for other people. In order to do that, we're taking the example of Jesus. Like you said, he took private moments to himself. He took naps. We have a godly example, literally from God, of how to take care of yourself so that you're able to take care of other people. So I don't understand this concept that self-care is this weird, selfish thing.
Yeah.
That might also come from our society, though, that whole idea of you always need to kind of be grinding all the time, too, and you're not allowing yourself to take that needed rest so that you can go, keep doing those things.
Well, and I think as a blanket statement, what we're almost seeing is a complete swing with the next generation, that it's like, well, no, it's all about me time. And that's where it's really tricky, that it's like we want to pursue holistic health, which means to me, it means working really hard when I'm working, doing my best, and intentionally creating space to recharge and to rest. Well, and I think in the generation before us, there's a major stigma that you're looked down upon if you need to go to a shrink or something like that, it was definitely way more looked down upon in past generations.
So this conversation that we have about all of this self-care being a weird idea that we actually should be practicing. For example, you could be just practicing Sabbath. It can be your intentional body movement. It could be taking a nap when you're tired. Like, these seem like things that should just come to you naturally. This just makes me think of this idea that the idea of actually taking care of your mental health and your physical body is definitely biblically based information. This is not just our personal opinion of how we think people should live.
Agreed.
Based on the example of Jesus himself, we know that you're supposed to be taking care of your physical and mental self. Sometimes what that looks like in our modern day is seeing a therapist. Personally, when I was going through the worst part of my depression after leaving this community, I sought out specifically a Christian therapist, because I knew I wanted a godly perspective, but I also wanted a professional therapist. So I found someone who was a Christian, but also had degrees in psychology and understanding how human brains work and how to fix them when they're broken.
Yeah.
So 100% recommend.
Well,
Look for help if you need help.
Yeah.
2 thoughts on that, if I may. One, I'm very blessed that my therapist is also a Christian. I think a really good psychologist also can attempt to focus on some of the science and set aside their opinions and beliefs and religions.
Oh, for sure.
The other thing I would, not to jump on you, Hannah, but just to maybe rephrase for those who might be a little bit more sensitive, to say that it's not necessarily that we are broken and just need fixing. I mean, don't get me wrong, we go to a doctor because we want something fixed per se. But at the same time, just like a lot of that wasn't necessarily your fault, right? Things happened, things have happened, things have been choices you've made and others have made. And so some of it's just we need guidance on how to rewire our brains to think about things differently and help train our bodies and brains to respond at an appropriate level, not just have trauma responses to everything, coming from someone who has ridiculous amounts of trauma responses.
Okay, that's a really important point, because even the vocabulary that I'm still unlearning and relearning is a result of this community that we were part of, where we talk about in the mental health episode, if somebody didn't line up with the expectations that they had of where you should be at mental health wise, you were considered like defective. And it was always your fault. You weren't praying enough. You weren't talking to God enough. You weren't in the Bible enough. And that is something that we're still processing how to get past that, which that is not a true, like, how do I say this? That's not an accurate assessment of the situation, is to tell someone, for example, with depression, that it's their fault that they're depressed, or they're depressed because they're not reading the Bible enough.
Sometimes legitimately
So
people's
harmful.
brains are not producing enough of a certain hormone or whatever, and that isn't necessarily their fault. I left the community really only because my husband and I got married and we moved out of state. Like, if it weren't for that, we probably would have stayed at least on the outskirts of that community. I don't think we were as part of a youth group by the time we left. That was honestly more due to family needs than anything else. But we were still part of a lot of that community, even just on a Sunday church basis, which wonderful people, and some of them I still stay in contact with, and I love hearing how they've also grown and become more nuanced as well. Did I have depression after the move? I would say yeah. I don't know if it was so much from the group. I think honestly, I think it was a part of it. I think I finally got the space to just let it all come out. And when my husband and I moved to Washington, we set it up so that I didn't have to work a normal job for a little bit. And so I pretty much just stayed home and figured out how to keep a house and cook and clean. And dude, I was so tired between my time.
It's a lot of work.
Really, I think the biggest things that led up to it was both his dad and my dad had some severe medical issues. And then the fall, right before, like within the 3 months right around that we got engaged, my husband's dad and my 2 grandmothers passed away. And there was a lot
at once.
All happening at once. Like I found out later our engagement got postponed a month. It would have happened sooner had it not been for another death in the family. And so we were both just emotionally and physically wiped out. I slept I was sleeping a solid 12 hours like every night for probably 3 months. And so I think a lot of it was just like coming back up. So was it all around the community? I'm sure there was parts of it. I think that's some of the complexity of the layers and layers and layers that created some of my PTSD and my depression and some of my struggles. So
we all have very, very different stories of how we eventually left this group.
Totally.
So
Totally.
we all probably have very different emotions regarding that, you know, surrounding all the things.
No, I think we
But
all had anger and happiness and, you know, all the array.
Okay, so you mentioned you got married to your husband and then you learned how to be a housewife. Do we want to talk about some of the things that you learned about being in a healthy relationship? Not necessarily compared to, but you can if you want to, what we were taught in the community.
You know, it's taken time. And I think each step had its pieces of growth. I think I met my now husband in the youth group, and we discovered we liked hanging out with each other. We loved leading worship together. He was a phenomenal support when my dad's major medical event happened. And after we got married, we had the opportunity to really press into the relationship with each other. Some of it was by choice. We called it our hermitage, where we were hermits and didn't want to talk to anybody for a little while. And it was really healthy for us to adjust that way. I had to figure out how to, you know, have a home of my own. Just what does meal planning look like? What does grocery shopping look like? Really truly pricing things out, living on a budget, what does that look like? And then after about 6 months in our small 600 foot square foot apartment, I realized I need something to do because now I'm bored, and there's only so much I can clean my 600 square foot apartment with just my husband and I. And I am bored out of my gourd and I don't know what to do. And then I found out that the place he was working needed some help and they were busy. So I was like, sure, I'll go work part-time. That'll be good. And so, you know, that was a big transition, I think, for us going, like, there was a transition of being out on our own. Both of us were moving out of our parents' homes for the first time. I was 19. And then there was a transition again when it became that I was working and he was working. And so all of a sudden, when we first got married, while I quote unquote followed all the good Christian housewife type things, I have no regrets, honestly, over that, because that was also just what we chose, that he would work full time and I stayed home. So it just made sense that I essentially did all the stereotypical housewife things. I have no regrets about that. And once I started working, we did have to go through a transition of saying, hey, I need some help with the house now. And so we did tag team it and do it well together. And honestly, even just as each transition has come in life, and I think this is the big thing that we learned that I've learned is that with different seasons, you guys just have to adjust on what you guys are doing and what the load looks like to juggle it. From the time we were both at that job to me working even more, I went from 25 hours a week to 30 hours a week. And then there were stints that we were really busy and I worked essentially full time. And then 5 years down the road, finally, when we kind of decided it was best for me to go to beauty school. And so I was doing 12-hour days at beauty school 3 days a week and then working part-time on the side. So then juggling again, well, how do we juggle house and work? How do we juggle shopping? How do we juggle XYZ? And then after school, I was out of school. I didn't have a job for a little bit. So then again, I was doing most of the house stuff, but it made sense and I was okay with it. And we agreed to do that together. And then since I've been back at work again, figuring out the juggle. And I think that's something I wish I would have heard about more healthy relationships where it can be really truly a team, because we would hear, oh yeah, we're a team. I do this and you do that. And I'm like, no, what if we both share the responsibility and really we can bounce it off? And there can be seasons that one of us quote unquote carries more of the load than the other person. And that being really what the team looks like. So, and then going through different communities in Washington, we've grown and learned different things, being able to juggle things better and what it looks like to have a healthy marriage and what it looks like to not have it all figured out. And like, just because maybe we figured out a rhythm for one season of life doesn't mean it's not going to change 3 months later or whatever.
Oh yeah. So. 100% understand that.
What I'm hearing from you is that you learned about boundaries and responsibility, sharing responsibility,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which we've probably said so many times before. One thing that Cass and I remember from being in this Christian community was that we didn't know we were allowed to create boundaries. We didn't know we were
What?
allowed to have shared responsibilities. We were always taught, like, this is your lane as a housewife, this is your lane as the
Yes.
husband provider.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear from someone else's perspective that it actually does work in a marriage if you like
Mm-hmm.
share
Yeah.
the duties, like, yeah, it's
Well,
okay.
I think part of what we weren't taught, which could be a combination of my family of origin and the communities we were in, is that there were boundaries. We can have boundaries both kind of in the lane, like you were just saying, there's like the lanes, but also just realities of boundaries of yourself, having the when do you come to the end of you and the next beginning of the next person. I almost like to think of like, if you have a circle around you and I have a circle around me, or like if we're both standing in giant chalk made circles or something, there's so far I can go towards you in my circle before I start walking into your circle.
Right.
And so having boundaries like that, and also understanding that there can be levels or like tiers of circles of how far you go with different people, like in your friendships, and how far you go with yourself in various levels of friendships. And kind of jumping into the healthy, circling back to the healthy relationships, having those boundaries, knowing where is the end of you, where's the beginning of someone else, what does it look like to speak truth into other people's lives, when are you called to do that? Because I personally believe that you have to have a certain level of friendship to be able to speak truth into someone else's life. I think that's another thing I just experienced. Was that I had people try to speak truth into my life. Sometimes it was not very gracious. Sometimes it felt like it was without love. And then even sometimes when it maybe was in love and it was speaking truth, that it was people who they didn't really have that close of a relationship to speak into my life in that way.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I can't grow to be teachable. And at the same time, there still has to be a certain level of friendship to be able to like call people out on stuff.
Definitely remember a couple times where probably well-meaning older kids in the group would try to give you advice, and it would
Oh dear.
be
Yes.
it would come across as very maybe egotistical on their part. Like, what, how can
Or
you tell me
judgmental.
this advice?
Yeah.
Exactly. Cass can probably
I'm sure Cassie has loads of stories.
Specifically remember a couple of those older kids in the group thinking that they were going to speak for God for me, that apparently they thought they were my mentor or something. And I did not have that relationship with them. I did not know them that well. And being in that group when you're getting that kind of instruction, I guess, from those kind of people, you just kind of had to like smile and nod and say, oh, thank you. And honestly, I didn't listen to anything they said because, again, like Carrie said, we didn't have that level of relationship or friendship or whatever for them to be able to speak to me or speak into my life in the ways that they were trying to, and for me to actually take what they were saying, I guess.
Something that I've learned and I'm still learning is being really careful now that I'm one of the quote unquote older kids is when a younger person comes to me and they ask for advice, I will very humbly and prayerfully try to figure out a good way to give them some truth and help. Because I remember going to older people for advice and then immediately just being like, oh, well, I'm an elite member of God's family, so I have an answer for you.
Oh dear.
And I just really want to make sure that I don't come across that way.
Yeah.
Which is something I'm still learning how to do with God's help.
Sure. Well, and the reality too is that I just want to fully acknowledge too that even all the things I say right now, shoot, in 5 years, I could look back and say, wow, that was really really dumb. And I want to have compassion to say, I hope I have the compassion to say that was the best that I knew then. And that's what I try to remember to my younger self. Like, I was doing the best I could with that which I knew. And that's where I also want to have compassion for others. And I want to continue to grow. Like Hannah said, I'm growing and I want to be better at trying to be able to give thoughtful advice very humbly, knowing that I may even say something that might even hurt that person. And hopefully they can repair from it down the road. Let's face it, we're not going to say things perfectly. We aren't, right? Like, who knows? I could be saying something stupid now. And I'm trying to do the best I can now and continue to grow and be able to say better later.
Okay, so with everything that we've talked about today, Carrie, is there anything that you look back on from your time being in this youth group or this Christian community and that you are especially either grateful for or regret?
Yeah. I think I said it a little bit earlier, but I would just reiterate too that, like, now that I've moved through some of my big feelings,
right.
I am grateful for the group. And I'm grateful for the people who had good intent to pour good into my life. And I think it's a part of my story. It's a part of my journey. And the reality is none of our journeys are all going to be hunky-dory, glorious, wonderful. And so and there were lots of fun times too. So it was part of my journey, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I'm grateful for it. And I'm saddened by the parts that really shaped me in very poor ways that I've had to work really hard to unlearn and relearn in a new, healthier way. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing I'd say. And yeah, if any of those people are listening, again, I appreciate you and you are per my story. And
yeah, definitely.
But there definitely were things that I hope that you or they have been able to grow out of. And I hope that I have too, that we can, like I said, I want to pursue being the healthiest version of the person I was created to be, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all the way around.
So in wrapping up this episode, Carrie, do you have any advice you'd like to give to our listeners?
I think to just summarize, and I've kind of said some of these things before, I would just encourage you to pursue healthiness, pursue being the healthiest version of the human being that you were created to be. Pursue mental health, pursue physical health, pursue emotional health. If you're spiritual, if you're not, pursue spiritual health. Just pursue trying to be the healthiest version of the human being you were created to be, and pursue the truth, and know that true science is going to align with the truth that God created if you're a believer. At least that's what I believe again. So pursue health and try to pursue being a good human being.
Thank you so much for talking with us today, Carrie. It was great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I love chatting and telling my thoughts.
Thanks for listening today, friends. As always, if you would like to reach out to us at any point and share your story with us, if there's anything that you would like to tell us, you can visit us at our website at shortskirtslongscripture.com. Always check out our Instagram at skirtsandscripture or our email skirtsandscripture@gmail.com. If you'd like to write us an email, we'd love to hear from you.
And if you guys have any more questions or want to hear more of my story, feel free to get in touch with me on Facebook. My Facebook name is Carrie Rose Gay. And feel free to shoot me a message.
I don't know how to end podcast episodes, to be honest. So I just like.
But that's all, folks.
Okay.
CPTSD, you got any?
I got some for you. Oh, not that one, but ADHD and PTSD for sure.